Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to show you how to change your inner and outer tie rods on your vehicle. So go grab a root beer and enjoy the show. Now for today's video, we are doing this job on a 2007 Dodge Nitro that happens to have a bad inner tie rod on the driver's side. Now, before you do this job, you should inspect your steering system components. So if you're not sure how to do that, I will post a link up above for you so you can go watch my How to Inspect Steering Components video, and then you can come back and watch this one. So this is on a 2007 Dodge Nitro. However, it's going to be very similar, if not exactly the same, for just about any vehicle on the planet. So let's get to it. Very first thing, we need to get this vehicle jacked up off the ground and put on a safety stands and get it nice and high so you've got lots of room to work. Now, if you don't know how to do that, I've also got another great video on how to do that. I'll post the link above for you to watch that. Now, once you have it safely secured, you're going to go ahead and take your wheel off. If you're doing this with jacks and jack stands at home, I highly recommend you break loose these lug nuts first before you lift up the vehicle. That way you will be able to undo this once it's up off the ground. So go ahead and take your wheel off. Okay, first thing we got to do is we got to back off this jam nut, and these threads back here will be gross. So take a wire brush and spend a minute and clean that up. And you can give it a hit at WD-40 or your favorite penetrating fluid. Okay, and then get yourself a wrench and hold the outer tie rod as you get a wrench on this jam nut, and we're going to back off this jam nut. Now we're going to take a wire brush and clean the threads on the end of our outer tie rod ball joint. And then we're going to take this nut off. Now in this case it was just a nylock nut to hold this on, but sometimes they have a castle nut with a cotter pin. So if that's the case in your vehicle, flatten out the cotter pin, remove the cotter pin, and then you can go ahead and take the castle nut off. Now the next step, I have to hammer on this spot right here of the steering knuckle pretty hard with a hand sledgehammer. So I don't want to accidentally miss and damage my threads, especially if I want to reuse this outer tie rod. So we're going to put this back on. Just a couple turns to kind of prevent that from happening. Okay, and then the trick here is with a hand sledgehammer, you're going to be hitting kind of in line with the steering knuckle right here. And what we're trying to do is take that tapered cone shape that's inside there, that hole, and for a split second, when we hit it hard enough, it's going to turn it into an oval. And the inner tie rod doesn't like that because it's a cone, so it gets ejected out. So should take a couple hits here. If you hit it hard enough, it'll pop on you. Okay, and then you can take your nut off and lift this outer tie rod off. And we'll put this nut back on just to keep the threads good in case we want to reuse it. Now at this point, we want to spin out our outer tie rod. So you're going to be holding this. And in some cases, this will just kind of nicely spin out. However, this one's been in for 15, 16 years and it is stuck. So on this part of the shaft of the inner tie rod, usually there is some flat spots so that you can fit a wrench on it. And that way that'll hold that from spinning. And then if you need to, you can get a wrench on here to continue turning it and get it going. In some ultra rare cases, you might have to put a little bit of heat on here, maybe a little bit of heat and put a wax candle in here to get it to suck in. That's usually a good trick to get that freed up. Now in this case though, there is absolutely zero flats up here for me to stop this from spinning. So we're going to use a very rarely used tool in automotive. We're going to use a pipe wrench so that we can grab onto this and prevent this from moving while we get a big wrench on here and undo it. Now when you go to undo this, it's very important that you count how many revolutions it needs to come right off so that when you're putting the new stuff back together, you can do the same amount of rotations back in, and this should be very close to where it needs to be for your alignment. Okay, so that's one, and just keep continuing counting every time this kind of goes down, or you can make yourself a line with the chalk here or a paint pen to be able to figure that out. Okay, that's two, and so on. Just keep counting until you have it all the way off. 25, almost 26. Okay, once again, clean the threads really well with a wire brush, and then we're going to take this jam nut off. All right, now we got to take this inner boot off, so we're going to take a pair of pliers and take the clamp off. And on the other end of the boot is a strap. Now, it's a very difficult one to get at and to film, so what you got to do is kind of get a chisel or a pry bar, get it on the clamp where you actually kind of undo it from, and you're going to have to kind of knock it off with a hammer, and once it's off, I'll show you what it looks like and where it goes. So really hard to film, but I'm trying to get a good shot for you guys. At the end of the boot, there's a little metal strap, and there's kind of like a block, or kind of like where it gets pinched and tightened. I'll circle it in the editing of the video, and so that's what we got to hit with a hammer and a chisel. Watch that you don't gouge into the rubber though, because we want to reuse that. So this is the strap I'm talking about, and kind of off camera what I did is I took a little pick, and because this bulge was way up at the top, I kind of grabbed it from the side, and then I was able to turn this into a better position for me to undo that. So now you can take a screwdriver and kind of open this up, and it'll come loose, and then that boot will come off. So with this boot, you can see the little tab here. There was a little square big enough for me to fit a screwdriver in there, and I basically just went like this and pried it until it was really loose, and then that allows this boot to get pulled off. All right, and there you can see there's our inner tie rod. Now, on this thing is going to have a flat spot that we can get an inner tie rod removing tool, and there's two kind of tools. I'll show you what I have, and if I don't have the other one, I'll show you a picture of it. And what we need to do is put it down onto that flat, and then lefty-loosey remove that. Now, if you're having trouble accessing this, you can turn the steering wheel all the way to the left, and that will expose this out on the steering rack and make it a little bit easier to access. So this here is an inner tie rod kit, and it's got all the different sizes of the different flat spots that you're going to find on your inner tie rod. And so this is the size for me. And then there's this part here. Now this tube part is what accepts the long shaft that comes off the inner tie rod. And on this end here, you just spin this kind of collar till those holes line up. That lets you fit this in like that, and then it kind of locks it and holds it in place. And then you slide it onto the shaft, and on this end, you're going to see that there's a 1/2-inch drive, so you can put an impact gun or a socket wrench on it and get that off. Okay, make sure you got the right size and fit it onto the flat. Should be very little play. So this is the one for this one. Okay, go ahead and install this onto the flats on the back of the inner tie rod. Put this on. Make sure that that collar is turned so that you can actually get it fully on, and then turn it to lock it in place so it doesn't want to just come undone on you. There we go. So you have to use a breaker bar to support the end when you crack it lefty-loosey. Well, there we go. And there's our removed inner tie rod. Now it's time to start putting stuff back in, but before we throw our new components in, take a few minutes and make sure that everything matches up the same and you got the right parts. That way you won't have any surprises. There we go. These look like they'll do. So, time to put these in. All right, before we put the new inner tie rod in, we're going to want to clean this area completely of all the old grease, especially on the inside there if there's any grease. I might even hit that with a little bit of brake cleaner. That way the blue thread locker that's on the new part will actually have a chance to be able to grab. So clean that all really well, and clean right on the lip at the back where the strap goes for the boot. On the new part, we're just going to take the cap off here, and you can see that blue kind of paste stuff. This is blue thread locker, so this is going to prevent this from loosening up on you. If there isn't any of this on, I highly recommend you put some on, but make sure you use only the blue and not the red so that you can take this off in the future. Now, while you're in here, it's probably a good idea also to take a look at the seal in here on the end of the power steering rack. If you've got lots of power steering fluid coming out here, that's no good. That's going to involve taking out the power steering rack and replacing or resealing that. All right, now take your inner tie rod and spin it in. Okay, once again, slide the end of the inner tie rod tool in on the flats first. Slide this down. Line up the tabs with the slots on the edge of the tool. And then turn the collar on the tool to lock them in place. And then we're going to torque this to 50 foot-pounds. That's what it says in our all-data torque specs. Okay, let's spin the collar and remove the tool. piece. Okay, now I've taken a look at this boot and it looks like it can be reused. However, this little metal clamp on the side, I'm not going to be able to reuse this. And it's an extremely hard spot to get in to put another one of these. So instead, we're going to go with one of these zip ties here, heavy duty ones. This is a 14-inch one. And we're going to basically pre-put it in like this. And then that's going to go on the edge like that. We'll snug it up a little bit here so it doesn't fall off on us. And then when we get it onto the lip on the steering rack, we're going to tighten this up and then we'll trim this down. If your aftermarket inner tie rod has a little extra bit of grease, you can go ahead and put it in there. In this case, this one didn't have it, but it does look like it's lubricated enough. Okay, now we're going to put this down on here. And we got to push the back end far enough that it goes onto the lip of the steering rack. And I'm going to position this clip down this way so that I can access it from the bottom. Now it's a pretty snug fit here, so you might have to turn and kind of push at the same time to get it to scoot back. Okay, once it's on the power steering rack, go ahead and snug up the tie. Make this nice and snug. Use a pair of pliers to be able to pull it nice and snug. And then use a pair of diagonal side cutting pliers to be able to just trim it off so that it's not hitting on anything. And give it a test to make sure that the boot doesn't want to come off on the backside. And then on the shaft here, we've got a little kind of like indented groove where once you put your clamp on, that will hold the end of the boot. So scoot that back like that, so it's over into the groove. And then we're going to reuse this clip like that. And just do a final check of that boot, make sure the back hasn't popped off. It looks okay to me. Now we're going to use some anti-seize. We're going to coat this thread here so that this will be easy to take off next time. We don't need a ton, it goes a long way. Let's put it all along there so that next time it'll be super easy to come off. Spin on the new jam nut. And we're going to go pretty far in so that we don't have to interrupt our counting when we put in our outer tie rod. Okay, now we're going to spin on our outer tie rod. And remember that we're going to be counting it back the same amount of turns as we did before, so make sure you line it up and kind of think like this was down, so one full revolution, this will be pointing back down again. 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on till you get the number that you need. Put a little never seize on the threads at the end of the outer tie rod so that those will go on easy and off next time. Okay, place the outer tie rod into the end of the steering knuckle. And this one has a castle nut, so we're going to tighten this one up. And they want you to tighten this one to 30 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees of extra rotation to get this to tight. Now, we also have to worry about lining up the hole with the cotter pin, so I would suggest that you go to your 30 foot-pounds and then tighten until you get the next cotter pin hole to go through, or 90 degrees, whichever is first. Okay, 30 foot-pounds. There's 30. So the hole for the cotter pin's right here, so we just have to turn it a little bit more. So put your brand new cotter pin in and splay or bend the other end out. That way that won't come undone, and kind of just kick them in a bit so it doesn't get, nobody's going to catch their hands on it, get torn open. And that cotter pin will prevent that castle nut from coming off and prevent your tie rod from disconnecting. Okay, and this beautiful aftermarket part made by Moog actually has a grease nipple so that you can go in every 6 months and add a couple shots of grease in there, and then this will last probably the rest of the life of the car. Not like the original equipment that doesn't have this because they saved some money and didn't want you to be able to maintain this, and that's already in the garbage. So go ahead and put this in. Now there will be a little bit of grease in here, but it does also look a little deflated here. So we're going to hit it 2 hits, and we put our finger on the boot, and you should be able to feel it kind of fill up a little bit. That's good to go. Don't keep going until you blow out your new joint. Okay, and then we're going to tighten this jam nut up against the end of the outer tie rod to lock that position. And then grab on here with a pair of adjustable pliers or the sized wrench. We're going to tighten this up to 55 foot-pounds for this vehicle. All right, should be good. All right, always a good idea before you put the wheel on and get it out of here, you want to check and make sure that everything is put in okay, everything's lubed up, you haven't forgotten something. So this looks good, so let's go ahead and put the wheel back on. We're going to torque these to 100 foot-pounds for this 2007 Dodge Nitro, but make sure you look up your specs for your vehicle. And we're always going to go in a cross pattern. And once you've done a cross pattern, do a circular pattern to make sure you haven't missed any. And you should be checking this in about 100 kilometers or a week, especially these aluminum rims, because they like to loosen up on you. So make sure you check them again. And if you're having troubles with the wheels spinning, you can do a couple things. You can snug this up as tight as you can up in the air and then lower it till it just touches the ground with the tires. Then you can finish tightening them. Or you can get someone holding the brakes for you. Or you can also put a wheel chock with this still up off the ground in the direction that when you tighten, the wheel wants to jam on it, and that'll prevent it from moving. All right, now that the job's all done, don't forget to do a final wheel shake test from the left to right to see that there's absolutely no play. Yeah, and there is no play in this, so the job is done well. Now, at this point, this now has to go to an alignment shop so that they can make sure that your toe angles are okay. And for me personally, I'm going to be doing a do-it-yourself string method to get my toe angle, and I'll probably make a video for that so you can check that out as well before I even leave the shop to go get an alignment. That way I don't have some really excessive tire wear going on in the drive to the alignment shop. Now, before you take off before the alignment shop, there is one quick check we can do with a tape measure just to make sure that this wheel we've adjusted is not dangerously towed out or towed in. So let me show you what I'm talking about with another caveman drawing. So if we imagine that this is the right wheel that we haven't actually changed, and this is the left wheel, and let's say that we got our turns wrong with our outer tie rod, and this is at a crazy toe out angle. Well, if we take a tape measure and we measure it from the same exact spot on the tires, in this spot, I'm just going to pick the corner because it's easy to show you. You can see that this spot here, from there to there, is like 10.5 inches. But if you measure in the same spot on the back of the wheel, that's 8 inches. And if this wheel is the same as this, with the same toe angle, that should be the exact same measurement. So we're going to take a tape measure, and we're going to measure from the same spot on a tire, and I'll show you where, on the front, at the center line of the wheel. Get that measurement, and then go to the back, and at the center of the wheel, measure that again. And we're going to adjust that tie rod until we get that even, and then that should be good to get us to an alignment shop. So what I'm going to do is pick one of these tread grooves to go from, so it'll be the same on both sides. So I'm going to go not the first, but the second. And I'm going to take the hook of my tape measure and put it onto that groove. And I want the height of this to be exactly, or as close as I can, to the center of the wheel, so that when I go to the other side, it'll be exactly the same. So now extend this over to the other side. Make sure your tape measure is nice and tight. It's not kind of hanging funny. And then find, once again, not the first, but the second groove on the inside edge, and line it up with your tape measure and record that down. So in this case, this is 57 inches and 7/8. Okay, and then from the rear of the front tire, once again, not find the first, but the second groove. Roughly put it in the center of the wheel, and then drag it over to the other side. And then pull the tape measure tight and line it up with not the first, but the edge of the second groove, and record that measurement, which is 57 inches and, what do you know, 7/8. So this is actually bang on. And because the front and the back measurements are exactly the same, this should be very close to 0 degrees toe angle, which will get us to the alignment shop safely. Now, if you find that the measurements between the front and the back are not the same, then what you're going to want to do is hold your outer tie rod, loosen your jam nut, back it off a couple turns, and then get a wrench to go on the flat spot of your inner tie rod, and you can adjust this either direction. Now you may not know which direction you need to move it, so what I suggest is move it a couple turns in one direction and then recheck the measurements from the front to the back, and if the numbers got better, then you know you have to keep going in that direction. If the numbers got bigger and worse, then you got to go the opposite direction, and then all you're going to do is keep going in the direction to get the numbers closer and closer to being similar, and as soon as they're the same, you can go ahead and tighten this jam nut back up. Hold the outer tie rod and tighten it back up to spec. And I would also recommend that once you final tighten and lock that jam nut, you should recheck those measurements to make sure that nothing adjusted when you were tightening this. All right, that's a wrap in another video from Way of the Wrench, this time on how to replace your inner and outer tie rods. Hopefully that was helpful and good info for you. If it was, let me know down in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And stay tuned for a DIY kind of toe angle alignment video from me so that you can make sure that this vehicle has decent enough toe angles so that you're not going to be peeling the tires off trying to drive to the alignment shop. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram, that we can see all the cool stuff going on in the shop in between videos. Till next time, take it easy.